let's talk about 11th chords. They are made of a lot of different notes, which can be sometimes altered and sometimes omitted. So in this video, I'll do my best to gather everything to understand them. We'll see how to build them, what are the different types, and how to use them. It's gonna go deep, so let's start right now and from the very top so we can all be on the same page. So to build any chord, you start with the notes of a scale. Then you can choose any one of those notes and build a chord from it. So to do that, you choose the note that will be the root note of the chord, and from this note, you follow the notes of the scale, keeping only one note every two. 3 notes in your chord and you have a triad, made of a root note, a third, and a fifth. If you add the 7th, it becomes a 7th chord. If you add the 9th, it becomes a 9th chord. And if you add the 11th, you then have an 11th chord. So an 11th chord is a chord made of 6 different notes, a root note, a third, a fifth, a 7th, a 9th, and an 11th. Now, each of these notes are separated by different intervals. Here it's sometimes 2 tones, sometimes it's 1 tone and a half, and it's this suite of intervals that will determine the quality of the chord, say if it's a major or a minor 11th chord, for example. To say it in other words, you have different moving pieces in your chord. For example, a 7th can be major or minor, a third can be major or minor, and depending on what composes your chord, you will have different names. For 11th chords, there are a lot of combinations, so let's start with the main ones. Let's start with the major 11th chord. It's the chord you can find on the major scale on the 1st degree, meaning if you start building the chord from the first note of the scale. So it will be made of a root note, a major third, a perfect fifth, a major 7th, a major 9th, and a perfect 11th. So this is a major 11th chord, and right now it's pretty dissonant. We'll see how to fix that in a minute, but for now, the minor 11th chord. It is made of a root note, a minor third, a perfect fifth, a minor 7th, a major 9th, and a perfect 11th. That's a chord you can find on the 2nd degree or the 6th degree of a major scale, for instance. Now, a dominant 11th chord is made of a root note, a major third, a perfect fifth, a minor 7th, a major 9th, and a perfect 11th. And as the name dominant suggests, you can find it on the 5th degree of a major scale. So these are the 3 11th chords we've seen so far, with the notes that compose them: the major, the minor, and the dominant. Before going further, I need to talk about a few common practices, because 11th chords are easily altered or have some note omitted, so understanding how it works will be handy for what we see next. I mentioned earlier that the major 11th chord was pretty dissonant. This dissonance is due to the 11th being only 1 semitone away from the major third. So to avoid that, it is common to either remove the third or raise the 11th by a semitone. If you remove the third, no problem, the dissonance disappears. And you can just do that on a major 11th chord. You can also do that on a dominant 11th chord, but the third here is kind of important for the function of the dominant. So we tend to prefer to raise the 11th on the dominant chord. That creates a dominant 9 sharp 11 chord that we can add to our list here. Of course, you can also raise the 11th on any major 11th chord to make a major 9 with a sharp 11, so we can also add this one to our list. But the major 9 sharp 11th is actually a chord you can already find in a major scale naturally, on the 4th degree. For example, if we are in C major, the 4th degree would be from the root note F, with the major 3rd A, a perfect 5th C, major 7th E, a major 9th G, and an augmented 11th B. And lastly, if we raised the 11th, it would then be only 1 semitone away from the perfect 5th, which also creates a dissonance that you sometimes want to remove. So it's also common to omit the 5th of the chord to avoid the dissonances with the 11th. So to sum it up in a simplified way, we don't always play all the notes of an 11th chord. To reduce dissonances, it's common to remove the 3rd or the 5th. And if the chord is major, you can raise the 11th by a semitone. These are the takeaways. Now I'll open a parenthesis because there are different ways to notate chords, and with all these alterations, it's important that we understand each other. So here's the system I'll use to write chords. You start with the root note, then the quality of the chord, like major or minor, will give the state of the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th, And all the extensions above that, like the 9th and the 11th, are major by default, unless stated otherwise. So a minor 11th chord, for example, will have a minor 3rd, a perfect 5th, and a minor 7th, just like a minor 7th chord, with a major 9th and a perfect 11th. When an extension is written, all the extensions below are implied. So if I write C11, that's a C chord with an 11th, but also with a 9th and a 7th. This is different than a add 11. A chord like C add 11 would be a C triad with only the 11th added, without the 9th or the 7th. Alright, so for the example, if I write the chord C minor 11th flat 5 flat 9, that means that it starts like a minor 7th chord, with the notes C, E flat, G, and B flat. Then we add the extensions up to the 11th, and then the 5th is lowered and the 9th is lowered. So that chord is made of the note C, E flat, G flat, B flat, D flat, and F. And I close the parenthesis. Now, armed with this knowledge, we can go ahead and note the rest of the 11th chord we can find in a major scale. So what chord should we have on the 3rd degree here? I want to start the chord from C, and C is the 3rd degree of the A flat major scale, so let's follow the notes of the A flat major scale. So the 3rd would be minor, with a perfect 5th, a minor 7th, a minor 9th, and a perfect 11th. So it's like a minor 11th chord, but with a minor 9th. The minor 9th is often removed when it's not in a dominant chord, and this is not specific to 11th chords. So here, if the minor 9th is too dissonant, we can omit it too. So that will make a simple minor 11th chord, or a minor 7th add 11. Now, let's find out the 7th degree. If it was a C chord, that would be the 7th degree of the D flat major scale. So let's follow those notes. That would make a minor 3rd, a diminished 5th, a minor 7th, a minor 9th, and a perfect 11th. That's like a half diminished chord with a minor 9th and a perfect 11th, so we can name it like a half diminished 11th flat 9. And it's also pretty dissonant. Diminished chords are often played only up to the 7th because of that, so we can simply note a half diminished 7th here. And here we have all the 11th chords of the major scale. And as every major scale has a relative minor scale that uses exactly the same notes, we can find the same chords in the natural minor scales too. They will only be offset to different degrees. And you know, the 5th degree in a minor tonality is supposed to be a minor chord, but we can turn it into a major chord to make better cadences. So basically everything that is here should also be usable in a minor tonality. Right there, you have all the chords you can use on each degree for major and minor tonalities. That should be everything you need to make them work in your composition. But I'd like to go a bit further and check out the harmonic and the melodic minor scales, because by taking different scales with different notes, we might find completely different chords in them. So harmonic minor and melodic minor scales. If we build 11th chord with those scales for all their degrees, we get this. That's a lot of chords we haven't seen yet. Some that we can play as is, like the minor major 11th with a minor 3rd and a major 7th. That's the detective chord, and other chords that seem to have very dissonant intervals. So we can play the game of simplifying them using the common practices we've seen earlier, to which I will add a couple of rules, like a flat 9 is often deemed too dissonant with the root note if it's not in a dominant chord, so it can be omitted. Diminished and half-diminished chords are often only played up to the 7th. Extensions above that may be too dissonant to be added. So, for example, we have a half-diminished chord here. It may be too dissonant with the 11th and the 9th, so we can simplify it to a half-diminished 7th. Same thing goes for the diminished chord we have here, that we can simplify to a diminished 7th chord. Here we have a major 11th with the augmented 5th. We can omit the 5th to make a regular major 11th chord, and from there we can either omit the 3rd as well, or we could raise the 11th to make a major 9 sharp 11 without the 5th. Or if you want to keep the augmented 5th instead, you may want to keep only that and drop all the chord extensions. And you often end up with several options like this. Like here, we have a minor 9 sharp 11. You can just play it as a minor 9th without the 11th. Or the sharp 11 being the same note than a sharp 4 or a flat 5, you can omit the 5th and the 9th to make a half diminished 7th chord here. So that's the logic I will apply to all the other chords. I will mark the notes I remove from each chord between parentheses, so you can pause the video and analyze it if you like. And there we have all the chords derived from the harmonic and melodic minor scales, in addition to the natural minor and the major scales. You should have all you need to start using them, though you may not want to make every chord 11th in your chord progressions. With so many notes in it, an 11th chord can sometimes sound a lot like another. For example, a A minor 11th can sound a lot like a G dominant 9 chord, as they have 5 notes in common. That's ambiguous. This ambiguity makes the voicing of those chords quite important, and it also makes them work particularly well on borrowed and substituted chords. These are subjects that I'll talk about more in detail in a future video that will come after we talked about 13th chord. So then, when we've seen every type of chords, we can dive deeper into some jazz common practices that can work with all of them. For now, these are all the type of 11th chords you need. I will add them all to my big music theory cheat sheet that I will share on my Patreon, and the current version of this cheat sheet without the 11th chord will still remain free on my website in case you would be wondering. And with this, I think that will be all for me today, so big thanks to everyone supporting the channel from Patreon. In the meantime, I wish you all a great evening or a great day. Take care of yourself, take care of each other, and I'll see you next time. Bye!